So we'll be talking about this shift from toxic to thriving, building an organizational culture that drives success. And I'm Steph Stern. I'm a Search Inside Yourself teacher. I'm really passionate about work being a place where people can thrive. So I'm extra excited to be here today with all of you. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Alana. Maybe you can give a little wave, Alana. Alana is our amazing Zoom tech for today. So if you have any technical challenges, questions that are maybe a little more off topic, please feel free to send her a direct message in the chat and she can help you out. Thank you so much, Alana, for being here. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic today for many reasons. This is, of course, a very timely topic. I think we're in a tough economic time, lots of layoffs. We're in the midst of this great resignation. And this is also a topic that's really personally important to me. I know I've seen the difference in places I've worked. Thinking of an organization where I worked many years ago, where I didn't really feel respected or supported. I don't know if I'd call it exactly toxic, but definitely corrosive. I didn't even last a year. I used to dread going to work and kind of wake up with that like pit in my stomach feeling. And I always felt really depleted at the end of the day. And I couldn't wait to kind of get out of there. Versus in an organization and jobs I've held where I do feel connected, supported to thrive, makes a huge difference. Like I regularly have felt excited to go to work, often happy to go above or beyond my role and scope. And I felt deep senses of meaning and belonging. And really, I would love everybody to feel that way about work. So this topic really means a lot to me. But I'd be curious to hear what it means to you. So I'm going to invite everybody to put in the chat a little bit about what brings you here today. So both, where are you joining from? I would love to know where everybody is joining from. I'm here in Oakland, California. And what brings you here today? Why this topic on toxic to thriving? And you may actually need to open the chat window if it's not open already. So you may need to move your mouse and have that Zoom toolbar appear in the bottom and pop open that chat window. Make sure everyone is selected in that blue bar and go ahead and share. What brings you here today? Where are you joining from? Joining from Italy. Oh, wonderful. So a need for more clarity about how to recognize what toxic is. Wonderful. We'll definitely get to that. Netherlands. Desire for a positive global culture. Spain. Oh, fellow Californian. Oh, I love that people are coming from all over. A really exciting global group. So yeah, so common in organizations, personal, professional reasons. Oh, often worked in toxic clubs, learning more about improving culture. Oh, wonderful, very exciting. So great to have you all here. Welcome again. And before I get started, I just want to say a little bit more about who is the we behind this webinar, who is SIY Global. So let me go back to 2007. Search Inside Yourself, or SIY, as you'll hear me call it, was started at Google, originally as a training for employees to develop mindfulness-based emotional intelligence skills. It became quickly very popular within Google as an organization. And so the founders in 2012 decided to launch the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, or SILI, as an independent nonprofit to bring the program to more people around the world. And that has been quite successful. And just last year, the Institute decided to launch SIY Global as its sister organization to really help expand the impact of the SIY program and other affiliated programs through a more full learning platform. SIY Global is dedicated to work with organizations and really with this goal of humanizing work. I really love that goal and this tagline, human-centered skills at work. So Search Inside Yourself and everything we do, we think about three core pillars: emotional intelligence, based on neuroscience, based on how the human brain works, how humans work, also based on organizational research, as well as on a foundation of mindfulness, of basic awareness. These human-centered skills are really missing in a lot of organizations. I've noted from your chat, I think many of you agree with that. And yet they're exactly what is needed to manage some of the complex issues we're facing today, how to navigate uncertain times, how to thrive as a team, how to build resilience, innovation, overall, how to succeed as individuals, teams, and as an organization. So we love to weave these three things together to help people really thrive. And based on that, today we're going to hone in and focus a little more specifically on the topic of culture. So today we're going to talk about how workplace culture is a key determinant for the health of an organization. When I'm talking about health, I mean things like employee satisfaction. How happy are people at work and with their jobs? Employee retention. Do people want to stay? How engaged are employees, as well as overall performance for individuals and for the organization overall. There's also a really interesting connection between culture and physical health. I'll show you a pretty shocking statistic in a minute. So I really want you to see that there's actually a high cost to toxic workplace cultures. These are not neutral. It can often, in pockets of culture or in pockets of organizations where there is a more toxic culture, sometimes people tend to say, oh, but that's just one person, one team, but they're really a high performer. And this toxicity gets kind of normalized or accepted because of other things. But actually, there's a really high cost. And so I think that's really important to understand. And we will also be emphasizing how this shift from toxic to thriving really requires emotional intelligence as the foundational skill for building a thriving culture. One statistic that I think is really fascinating here comes from a 2019 HubSpot survey, where they found that 82% of employees would consider leaving their jobs for a more empathetic company. 82% of employees want more empathy at work, so much that they would consider leaving. That's pretty huge, right? So again, this idea of emotional intelligence is really the foundation for a thriving culture. Okay, so as you've seen already, I have a lot I want to share with you. There's a lot of really interesting research and data on this topic, and I also want this to be interactive. So we'll be using chat as a way to share, and we'll also have some time for reflection and journaling. I really want to give you all a chance to try on these ideas and start to see how they might apply to you, to your team, to your organization. Whether you are in an individual contributor kind of role or management leadership, everybody has an impact on the culture around them. And I want to make this really practical for you to leave with some things that you might want to consider bringing to your colleagues. All right, so as we get into it, this question of why now? Why are we at SIY Global and all of you gathered to talk about this idea of shifting from toxic to thriving? Well, in this moment, I think it's a bit of an understatement to say we are facing some tough and uncertain economic conditions. Whether you call it the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, we've seen higher levels of turnover since the start of COVID than ever before. Kind of an amazing thing, right? In this midst of this pandemic where there's so much uncertainty, you might think people want to kind of hunker down and stay put, but actually no, people are reassessing their relationship to work. Things that are not working for them, they're willing to leave and to make these big leaps. Importantly, the single best predictor of turnover is toxic culture. I'll share more about that research in a minute. But on the other hand, companies that have a reputation, like a proactive reputation for a healthy culture, saw lower than average turnover during the first 6 months of the Great Resignation. So culture really matters here, and it's possible to actually do something about it. Not easy, but it is really possible to foster a culture that allows both people and businesses to thrive. It doesn't have to be either or. We're talking about how culture works for both employees and for the bottom line. So I would love to hear from you as we start to think about what culture is. I'm going to invite you again to put in the chat, what comes to mind when you think about organizational culture? Could be any kind of attribute, something that does work, something that doesn't. Culture is kind of a squishy, nebulous thing. So I'm curious to hear from all of you. What comes to your mind? values, behaviors, concepts, yeah, norms. Anything else? These are great. Values are often reduced to buzzwords. Yes, that can be a real challenge. What you stand for. Shared values that are lived by most people. That's a lovely definition. Yeah. So I think what we're kind of seeing, the way people behave when X happen. Yeah, how people respond to things. Wonderful. It is this culture, when we talk about it, can be tricky because it is this a little bit amorphous thing. It's something we all experience. We all kind of know it when we see it. But what is it? The way people collaborate and interact. Great. That's a good one. That's pretty close to the definition that I have, which is culture is how and why things get done. How and why things get done. So both how we do it is the relationships, the processes, and why. What are some of the values behind it? How is decision making happening? Who's in on those decisions? As you are all pointing to, it's a pretty complicated mix of a lot of factors. So culture reflects environment that we work in, what behaviors we see, what behaviors are recognized and rewarded, what behaviors are discouraged or maybe actively punished. It is a reflection of values, both stated and lived, as several of you have pointed out in the chat. It also is a reflection of rituals. How do we come together and gather? What are some of the practices that an organization or a team has? As well as shared language. I have not yet met an organization that does not have its own like acronym soup, right? We all have this kind of shorthand language that we use when we get together and work, and that matters. That helps shape the culture, how we think about things, what gets prioritized and important. Importantly, culture is shaping both people's individual experience of work and the work product or outcome. And it's all about how we are relating and working with the people around us. So you can think of emotional intelligence as the fabric of culture. I'm going to be talking a lot about emotional intelligence, you can gather already. So let me give you a little bit of a definition here. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage one's emotions and understand the emotions of others. So it includes these key ingredients: self-awareness, self-regulation, our ability to manage and work skillfully with our own feelings; motivation, understanding our own values and what motivates us; as well as these interpersonal skills, empathy and social leadership skills. These emotional intelligence skills are really essential for building a workplace that has healthy collaboration, healthy conflict, where employees feel valued and connected. So I think you're already starting to understand a bit about the importance of culture, and actually likely you are here at this webinar having joined me because you know that culture is important. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about many of the factors that culture touches on. This may be for you, but again, you're already here, so this may be helpful kind of data for you to actually make the case to other people in your organization as well. One key piece, and this comes from a Deloitte study from a couple of years ago, when they surveyed, about 87% of organizations cited culture and engagement as one of their top challenges. 87%. So this is a widespread, recognized challenge. About 50% of their organizations said the problem was very important. And a company culture directly impacts many aspects of employees' experience and company performance on some really key metrics. So on financial performance, there is a through line between culture and financial performance. It, of course, impacts retention, right? As I said, toxic culture is the #1 driver of turnover right now in the Great Resignation. Culture also impacts innovation, particularly in this changing time, competitive markets. Most companies want some amount of innovation, and you need a safe culture that allows new ideas to thrive. And then finally, as I've mentioned, culture really is also about the employee experience. It's a direct connection on employee satisfaction. So if culture is important to business. And actually, again, according to that Deloitte study, organizations that create a culture defined by meaningful work, employee engagement, strong leadership are outperforming their peers on key business metrics. So culture matters. It's important to business, to a bottom line, to employees' experience. What happens when a culture is unhealthy or has some unhealthy traits? So that's what we're referring to as a toxic work culture. And when I talk about a toxic work culture, it could be that the whole organization is just toxic and terrible, but more likely it actually means that a company might overall be somewhat healthy, but has some pervasive cultural traits that are getting in the way. Or it could have some pockets of the organization that have toxic cultural traits. It could be that a division or maybe a team under a particular leader might have some pockets of some toxic workplace microclimate, so to speak. And keep in mind here, a toxic trait can be extreme, like a culture of harassment, abuse, unhealthy competition, or it can show up in a more mild or subtle way as well. Might look more like people feeling like they have to work extra hours to be seen as competent, maybe an environment where it doesn't feel okay to be honest. Could be something else. So I'm curious again to hear from you. We're going to get into some research about toxic culture, but before we do, I'd be curious to hear what cultural traits do you think have a toxic effect in an organization? And this could be from your organization or team, but I'm not going to assume it is. Maybe you're thinking of a previous job like I had. Maybe you've noticed things in the news about toxic organizations, maybe thinking about complaints that friends make. What are some cultural traits that you think have a toxic effect in a team or organization? And again, feel free to stick it in chat. Self-centered thinking, yes, versus kind of a team thinking. Talking behind people's backs, expressing disagreement, but not directly, encouraging people to compete. Yeah, micromanagement. But oh, that's interesting. Micromanagement came up a couple of times. Yeah, lack of collaboration, gossip, competition. Ooh, yes, you're all naming things that I feel a little like, ooh, I don't want to work there. Absolutely. An environment driven by fear. Yes, that's really, really wise. Intimidation, absolutely. So I want to share a little bit about, these are all great answers, and we're going to organize them into some main themes here based on research by Donald Sull at MIT and Charles Sull at CultureX. It's a great father-son team that did this research on this idea that the single best predictor of turnover driving the Great Resignation is toxic culture. That's what they found looking at large data sets of companies, admittedly mostly in the US. I know we have a global audience here. And based on employee feedback, they came up with what they call the toxic 5. And in their words, they say when employees join a company, they expect to find a culture that's inclusive, respectful, ethical, collaborative, and free from abuse by those in positions of power. And when people show up and don't, when they see the opposite, they interpret it as a toxic culture. And so I've just kind of alluded to the toxic 5, but let's walk through them. So the first one is disrespectful, a lack of consideration and dignity for others. This is the single biggest predictor of how an employee rates their culture. If they find the culture disrespectful, they're much more likely to think negatively about the culture, to call it a toxic culture, and to want to leave. And that includes both the relationships, right? Having respectful relationships with peers, with a team. It also includes the policies and systems of the organization, feeling like those are respectful of employees as people, as humans doing the work that they're doing. The second, this toxic 5, is non-inclusive. And that means a mix of things. That's the biases, lack of equity across areas like gender, race, sexual orientation, age, as well as nepotism, a sense that a manager might have a favorite, is playing favorites. This also includes a feeling of an in crowd or a clique, anything where people are made to feel not welcome or not included in decision making, non-inclusive. People feel like they don't have a voice and they don't matter as much. The third one is unethical behavior, dishonesty, and that also can include a lack of regulatory compliance. The more mildly toxic, so to speak, version here might be around making false promises, might be around sugarcoating something, right? When leaders maybe paint a rosier picture of how the business is doing than it really is. Things that lack honesty erode trust. It makes people sort of suspicious and lacks trust, and that erodes a relationship. The fourth of the toxic 5 is cutthroat. A number of you named this kind of in chat, right? If people are just out for themselves, backstabbing, ruthless competition, really a sense of undermining or sabotaging one another. So just to be clear, this is not just the friction of collaboration. Yes, it is hard to work with other people. Sometimes many organizations can have a sense of being siloed. What makes something cutthroat is really this idea of being more individually driven and undermining one another. And then the last of the toxic 5 is abusive. Bullying, harassment, hostility. That includes things like a manager taking out their frustration on their team, yelling. Abusive, very toxic and unpleasant. We know that pockets of toxicity in organizations are heavily correlated with the leadership of that microculture. So there actually is no evidence about toxicity relating to certain sectors or certain business units or organizational functions. Toxicity can happen anywhere. It's much more about the leadership and these norms of the local culture. I want to pause for a moment and just let you sort of take in this list: disrespectful, non-inclusive, unethical, cutthroat, abusive. And I think you can certainly see that there's a connection here between these toxic attributes and a general lack of emotional intelligence. As someone mentioned in chat, this also is very fear-based. You can kind of sense underneath all of these terrible behaviors, probably a lot of fear, insecurity, or behaviors that are designed to invoke fear in others and maybe a sense of control. Just imagine for a moment working in an organization that has all or many of these. Like, how would it feel? And just to highlight, I want to say a little bit more about the cost of a toxic culture, both for organizations as well as for individual employees. So toxicity, as I think I've already kind of touched on, has impacts on so many aspects of an organization, including attrition and turnover, right? The more toxic, the more people want to leave, the more turnover you have, the more expensive that also is for an organization. There's a direct connection between toxicity and also physical well-being. So this statistic I find quite shocking. A person is 35 to 55% more likely to be diagnosed with a major disease if they work in a toxic culture. I just find this so shocking, really highlights the importance of deliberately making this shift from toxic to thriving. When a culture is known for being toxic, it of course makes it difficult to hire, to attract people to join the organization. And it has a huge impact on overall morale. I think this statistic is really quite shocking. About 1 in 4 working Americans dread going to work, dread something that we have to do every day where we spend so much of our waking time. And of course, that depletes us and it impacts our performance. And sometimes even what makes something so toxic is this idea it could actually be kind of corrosive. It can eat into our sense of who we are, our self-esteem, spill over into other aspects of our life. There's a great question in the chat about what's the difference between disrespectful and abusive. And yes, I agree with that. I think there's a sense that, to me, there's a sense of abusive, disrespectful being kind of on a continuum of really bad behavior, mildly bad behavior, and we'll get to the corrective behavior in a moment. To me, abusive is a little more harsh, right? Yelling, bullying, harassment. Disrespectful is definitely a much more mild thing, ways in which a work can maybe more subtly give people a sense of not being respected as a professional or as a human being. So I think it's fair to think of that as a bit of a continuum for sure. So as I've mentioned, toxic cultures can happen in any sector, any part of an organization. Just going to highlight a couple of examples. Unfortunately, there are many, but I'll just share with you a few. One is Wells Fargo. A few years ago, they faced the Senate Banking Committee over complaints about a toxic sales culture. The pressure on the sales team was so high, it drove some salespeople to deceive customers, open unauthorized accounts, talk about unethical and I think illegal. And just to be clear, this was not some old branch of Wells Fargo. This was in their headquarters in San Francisco. So it was that the main environment of the Wells Fargo headquarters was so high pressure, it led to this unethical, cutthroat kind of environment. Also ended up in a very expensive settlement for folks. You can also get toxic cultures in places where you least expect it. So the Ellen DeGeneres show, for example, employees have claimed dealing with different forms of abuse, racial microaggressions, a fear of retribution if they even raised complaints. Ellen herself has been called out for being verbally abusive, mean. People complained about being penalized for taking medical leaves. I don't want to pick on these two companies. I'm sure we can all think of many other toxic companies that have been in the news. I'm thinking of VW a few years ago for faking emissions numbers, Twitter recently with their sudden huge layoffs. So it's less that these two companies have done anything wrong. I really want to just point out more this sense that companies in all sorts of sectors can have these toxic kinds of behaviors, and that toxic cultures have huge impacts on the company, can be very public, very expensive, and of course on the well-being of employees involved. All right, so with that context on toxic culture, we're going to do a bit of journaling. I think building a thriving culture really starts with an awareness of what is not working. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on your own team or organization. And this is just for you. I'm not actually going to ask you to share anything. So you can truly be honest with yourself. And I'm going to invite you to reflect on what are the signs of the toxic 5 showing up in your organization or team? How do they show up? Even if your culture is generally quite strong, maybe there are some toxic attributes present. Remember, toxicity could be very extreme and overt. It could also be very subtle or mild. So here are the toxic 5 for you again. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to reflect and journal. All right. And bringing that sentence to a close. I know that might be short, so I encourage you to keep reflecting on this. I think this can be really rich to figure out if there are any toxic traits showing up in your culture, however mild, they might be things that are worth really addressing. From here, we're going to shift into this toxic to thriving shift. So we've explored some unhealthy traits that we want to be aware of, and let's see what are some antidotes to the toxic 5. Before I do that, I would love to hear from you. What are some of the signs of a thriving workplace culture to you? Maybe what are some things that help you really thrive and bring in your best to a team? And again, please feel free to put that in the chat and share it with all of us. There's a lot of great wisdom in this group already. Clear agreements, honesty. Yeah, top-down leadership. Permission to not be my best all the time. Great. Friendliness. Yeah, work as one team, a sense of being in it together, transparency, supportive environment, asking for opinions and taking other people into serious consideration. Yeah. If you like to go to work, yeah, that's a great indication that things are working. Collaborative environment, supporting each other, open to mistakes. Oh, this is great. I want to work with all of you. I love what you're sharing. Absolutely. Probably easier said than done, but these are really, really beautiful attributes. So yeah, help us thrive. So I'm going to be sharing some key attributes of a thriving culture. Laughing in meetings. Yes, good one. I'll be sharing some key attributes that address the toxic 5 and are pulled together from research on high-performing teams and organizational cultures. As I go through this, I'm going to be sharing a lot of different behaviors of a thriving culture. You've named many of them already. And I encourage you to jot down any of the ones that really spark something in you. Maybe something that really lands, that's curious about, that you want more of in your team. We're going to have another chance for some journaling and reflection in a moment. So just see if you want to collect any little gems as we go through these. So this shift from abusive or disrespectful to a feeling of respect, right? Feeling respected is by far the highest ranked, most important element to employees when ranking a company culture. So in this research by Donald and Charles Sull, respect came out as twice as important as things like supportive leaders, job security, and almost 3 times as important as other benefits and perks. People, of course, really want to feel a sense of respect. Respect is built through behaviors like these, like this sense of being listened to, recognizing achievement. The Search Inside Yourself team has this amazing, wonderful ritual of starting staff meetings with an appreciation round, the chance regularly to recognize achievement. We also talk about what's hard. So there's something really respectful and humanizing about this range of things both going well and allowing for things to be hard. Respect is also about giving and receiving supportive feedback. I think this one is so important because so often disrespectful or abusive behavior is justified with this idea of, well, we have to get better at something. I'm just telling it like it is. I'm just being direct. But there's a way to give supportive feedback in a way that is respectful. It's also not respectful to totally avoid feedback, right? We want to help each other be better in our jobs as people, as a team. So this idea of giving supportive feedback, helping people in their growth. Overall, respectful is about seeing others as whole humans. Really important. The second shift is the shift from cutthroat to psychological safety. In a cutthroat culture, as I mentioned, it's sort of about backstabbing, unhealthy competition. People are only out for themselves. Whereas one of psychological safety is where people are orienting to a greater team. People feel safe to show up and contribute, and they make it safe for others. So that includes things like asking for help, being able to say, I don't know, being able to make mistakes and to learn from mistakes, creating space for new ideas, right? That may mean challenging the status quo. you need psychological safety for real collaboration, for a team to really operate as more than the sum of its parts. And that also includes embracing productive conflict. In the effective teaming program, they talk a lot about this idea of having a lot of personal connection and intellectual friction, right? You need to actually feel safe to disagree for a team to work, but that safety comes from that sense of connection. So it's a really sweet balance there. Among companies that have remarkable cultures, psychological safety was the #1 trait that those organizations have in common. And in addition, psychological safety is actually shown to improve many different business metrics, such as innovation, adaptability, both of which are so critical in today's workplace. So that shift from cutthroat to psychological safety, that team orientation, is really critical. The next shift I want to talk about is from non-inclusive to inclusive, right? Truly valuing diversity, equity, and belonging. I feel like this connects to and builds on psychological safety. Being inclusive means accepting and valuing people as they are, for who they are, for the different perspectives that they bring. So seeking out a diversity of people and perspectives, right? If I think about how a team gets stronger together, it's by actually being able to account for and build on these different perspectives. This idea, no one of us can see everything, and we're stronger together, and we actually value that coming together. That means everybody actually needs to have a voice and a sense that they can speak up and share their perspective. Creating a sense of belonging. I think belonging can feel like a kind of squishy word here, but this actually means that people feel welcome. And when people feel welcome, they're able to actually contribute and speak up. People feel safe to do that. So again, building on that idea of psychological safety. When a workplace is inclusive, research shows it has many, many benefits, including higher revenue growth. So this, again, not some fluffy idea, but actually tied to key business metrics. Businesses tend to have more readiness to innovate, an increased ability to recruit a diverse talent pool, and more than 5 times higher employee retention. The idea of inclusion is really important. And true inclusion really requires emotional intelligence and requires self-awareness to check our own biases. Where are we not listening to people? It requires empathy to allow for more perspective taking and valuing other people's opinions. And then the last shift that we want to make is one from unethical to a culture of integrity or honesty. And this applies, I think, to how employees are treated individually, how we behave as individuals, as well as how an organization sort of treats its customers or clients and thinks of its impact in the world. In our own behaviors, integrity can look like being responsible for one's own actions, both good ones and bad ones, right? Really owning up to the impact we have on others. Demonstrating a trustworthiness. We want to work with people that are reliable. That means living up to your word. That might also include recognizing one's own limitations and making responsible choices. That might mean renegotiating a commitment, changing a deadline, but doing it in a way that's honest and clear. That includes owning up to mistakes. Again, this idea of really being able to make mistakes, recognize them, learn from them individually and as team. It also includes giving credit where credit is due. So sharing credit with others. Integrity has so many different dimensions. It's much more than emotional intelligence for sure, but it definitely relies on us to be honest, which relies on self-awareness as us as individuals for our impact on others and those around us, as well as the self-awareness at the organizational level to really recognize the impact an organization is having on its stakeholders and on the world. So I want to give you a moment to kind of just take in these thriving 4. Kind of imagine, what would it be like if all of the teams you worked on were cultures of respect, inclusivity, where you felt a sense of psychological safety, where people behaved with integrity? As someone pointed out before, the toxic cultural traits were really fear-driven, whereas I think you can get for a sense of these are really based on trust, connection, healthy collaboration. There's a sense of openness, right? And there's neuroscience behind it here. When we are acting out of fear, we tend to constrict, we go into amygdala hijack. When we feel a sense of safety and trust, we have access to our prefrontal cortex. We can actually think better, right? We can show up and perform better as well. So just take this in for a moment. Like, how does it feel in your body if you imagine showing up to work in an organization that has these thriving qualities? I feel much more of a sense of excitement, desire to be there, openness, which I think is what a lot of these thriving companies actually get to have. I'm going to share a couple of examples. Hope we can all think of many examples of really wonderful, human-centered, thriving cultures. I'm going to share one really notable one, Southwest Airlines. They're known for this really fun, hardworking, but like fun, connected, collaborative culture. They have an amazing set of values. It really emphasizes humor, which I think is super fun, specific attribute to them. And that many of their core values also really align with aspects that we've been talking about, like treating others with respect, being a passionate team player, right? Not a cutthroat environment, but really seeing yourself as part of the team and celebrating successes. They also talk about what behaviors they want to reward and which ones they want to punish. They particularly love rewarding humor, which is a really sweet facet of what it's like to be there. And they specifically talk about punishing dishonesty, right? Ensuring that they have that shift from unethical to ethical and honest. And people there seem to really live into their values and create a place where people want to work. It's known for being kind of a people-first culture, and that really started with Herb Keller, the founder of Southwest Airlines. He said, the business of business is people. So he has always seen his employees as kind of the first customer and the core of the business. This is also a great example of how being human and putting employees first actually drives business metrics. So they have seen 44 years of profitability. This is actually astounding in the airplane sector, which is known for incredibly thin margins and bankruptcy. So to actually have a profitable airline year over year is quite astounding. Lowest number of customer complaints in the industry and 85% positive employee satisfaction score. When I think about all the hassle of airline travel, I think this is really particularly incredible for Southwest Airlines. So let me give one more example. And this is of a well-being agreement, comes from something that was shared by Google last year. They called it a well-being manifesto. They actually adopted this from the UK government digital service department, and it's since been adopted by many organizations. So it's such a great example. They normalized that it's okay to do all of these things. I'm not going to read these aloud, but it's just so wonderful. It's okay to be confused, to not know everything. It's okay to have a cry. It's okay to say you're not okay, right? This really is a powerful way to show respect for the humanity of employees. It normalizes the ups and downs that we have all day, gives people permission to just be human at work. As somebody stated in the chat, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to also build rituals and actually really live that out. So the agreement is just sort of a starting place. But it's a great thing to just get you started to thinking about, okay, what can you do? Changing culture is definitely possible. And I will say it's hard. It can take time. It can take patience. You can think about it sort of turning around a tanker ship. So I've already named a number of different attributes and behaviors that create a thriving culture. I just want to highlight a number of different things that you can do. Of course, you can practice any or all of these thriving cultural examples that we've talked about, given you a lot of different examples of behaviors. And you can start by just living it out for yourself and having an impact on those around you, whether that's recognizing people for their effort, ensuring people have a voice, paying attention to who's speaking up in meetings, who's not, owning and normalizing mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. I've named a number of different pieces. You might think about creating a team or organizational well-being agreement. What do you want to normalize? What is it okay for your team to actually do? How do you want to show up? You also might get curious about people's needs and practice some mindful listening to better understand what people actually want. So I'm giving you a lot of ideas, but you might actually want to go ask people. That would be a great idea as well. And with that, you may want to learn about your team's fears and insecurities and be courageous about sharing your own, really normalizing. It's okay to have fears and insecurities and to talk about them. Brene Brown talks about how one of the biggest underlying fears at work is this fear of being irrelevant, right? We all want to come and be seen as relevant, competent, contributing something meaningful. And we have this underlying fear that we won't actually be relevant to our team. And that can be exacerbated by age. Maybe we're early in our career or late in our career, by changing organizational strategy, changing technologies. Lots of fear there underneath, and it can be really healthy to actually let that out, to expose it and talk it through. And then, of course, another thing you can do is actually invest in some training to enhance emotional intelligence in your organization. I hope I've really highlighted that emotional intelligence is a healthy foundation, is an essential foundation for a healthy and thriving culture. And that is actually a really trainable skill. So with that, we're going to do a little bit more journaling. So we've started to think about what are some of the toxic cultural attributes that you might have in your team or organization. And I want to give you some space to think about how you might build on them for a really thriving culture. So I'll put back up the list in a minute. I'm going to ask you to just sort of choose an area or a couple of behaviors that you would like to put some attention on yourself for your team or organization. Maybe you'll build on something that sparked your attention as I walked through them, or something that strikes you now. So I'm going to ask you to spend about 3 minutes here considering what are some initial action steps that you might take to help begin this process of transformation. Could be something you want to try out just for yourself or to support your team, or it could be something that contributes to a larger change. And I'm specifically going to invite you to also pay attention to what's happening in your body and in your emotional landscape as you do this journaling. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you afraid it won't go well? Just see if you can pay attention to what cues your body and your emotional landscape might be giving you as well. All right, so here are the toxic 5 and our thriving 4, just to give you inspiration to pick one to focus on. And again, I'll give you 3 minutes to do some journaling. right, so bringing your sentence to a close. And I see a request to share references, and yes, you'll be getting some more references. I'll talk on that in a moment. But first, I would love to hear from you. Is there something you'd like to take away? Maybe it's something you learned, maybe it's an insight, maybe it's an action you want to commit to. If you could just remember just one thing from our time together, was there something you'd want to make sure to take away? I'm going to invite you to put that in our chat. And especially if it's a commitment, it might really strengthen your resolve to share it publicly with all of us. We won't literally have to hold you accountable, but just to make a little bit of a public commitment, something you may want to try on, maybe just an insight that you gained from our time together. The idea of a well-being agreement. Love that. Yes, transformation needs dedication and commitment. Tangible action, it's possible. Yes, I love that. Very, very hopeful and very true. I think that's right. Transformation, particularly about culture, right? We talked about how many aspects build culture. And so it is this process of transforming kind of piece by piece. Found it insightful to think about workplace culture in such a structural way. Yeah, great. You need to not sugarcoat as much. Oh, that's a great takeaway. Being more vulnerable, more honest. Yeah. Agreement with well-being agreement, recognizing and working to overcome toxic traits, and that begins internally with the self. Yes. Oh, you all would seem like you would make such amazing colleagues. Like this would be a really good, thriving team together with all of these insights. References are helpful and help me increase the likelihood to listen when I speak up, to say there's some behaviors that are problematic. Oh, wonderful. Yes, I hope this really armed you with some references, data to really speak up around some of the more problematic aspects that you might be seeing. That's wonderful. Great. So let me talk about a few next steps. So we will be sharing an email with you that has the recording of this webinar. So if you want to revisit any of the content, we'll also include a handout and some resources for you. We'll make sure to include the reference, particularly around that toxic 5. Those are some recent studies from the Soul father and son duo, so we can share those. We will also be sharing a discount code, 15% off any of our upcoming public programs. So if you want to come join us, attend, help develop your own emotional intelligence, I highly recommend that as well. And I've shared a lot about how emotional intelligence is really the foundation of a thriving culture. Our team at SIY Global would love to support you in this if that feels like a fit for your organization. We have a number of different offerings that help build that foundation. So in addition to our original amazing Search Inside Yourself program, there's a newer Adaptive Resilience series, Effective Teaming. We also do keynotes and coaching and more. And if you want to be trained to bring this kind of emotional intelligence training to your organization, we also have an organizational teacher training coming up. It's really an incredible program. I can't recommend the teacher training highly enough. It's a transformative experience just for participants. And then it also equips you to bring these programs and others to your organization. It's really amazing when people internally in an organization are able to share it and scale it. I've talked a lot about how much culture matters, how important it is to have this foundation of emotional intelligence. And I'll just share an example. I think SAP is really great proof of this. They've trained over 11,000 employees in Search Inside Yourself. They have over 8,000 people actively participating in a virtual mindfulness community. And they've actually seen a 200% return on investment with the training due to an increase in employee engagement, a decrease in absenteeism, an increase in leadership trust. So really amazing result. Again, building that foundation of emotional intelligence that really shifts both employee experience as well as actual business outcomes. Quite incredible there. So I would love to make sure to stay connected. SIY Global is on different social media platforms. Thank you, Alana, for putting the website in the chat. I encourage you to go there, check out the different programs and offerings. If you have any questions, please reach out to our team at info@siYglobal.com. Would be happy to connect you with one of our engagement managers and answer questions, help see if bringing one of our programs is the right fit for your organization. So to close, I'll just leave you with this amazing Brené Brown quote. I think she just really summarizes what we've been talking about so well. So Brené Brown in Dare to Lead says, if we want people to show up, to fully show up, to bring their whole selves, including their unarmored whole hearts, so that we can innovate, solve problems, serve people, we have to be vigilant about creating a culture in which people feel safe, seen, heard, and respected. Thank you all so much for being here today. I hope together we can all contribute to helping people feel safe, seen, heard, and respected, even just a little amount. So go forth and let's make that happen in however that unfolds for you. Thank you again, everyone, so much for being here. Such a pleasure to see you and get to share all of this with you. Have a great rest of your day.